document that you could share with the media as you wanted to?
Correct.
Through a friend?
I understood this to be my recollection recorded of my conversation with the president. As a private citizen, I felt free to share that. I thought it very important to get it out.
So were all of your memos that you recorded on classified or other documents, memos that might be yours as a private citizen?
I'm sorry, I'm not following the question.
Well, I think you said you'd use classified.
Oh, yeah, not the classified documents. Unclassified, I don't have any of them anymore, but I gave them to the special counsel. But, yeah, my view was that the content of those unclassified, the memorialization of those conversations was my recollection recorded.
So why didn't you give those to somebody yourself rather than give them through a third party?
Because I was worried the media was camping at the end of my driveway at that point, and I was actually going out of town with my wife to hide, and I worried it would be like feeding seagulls at the beach if it was I who gave it to the media. So I asked my friend, make sure this gets out.
It does seem to me that what you do there is create a source close to the former director of the FBI, as opposed to just taking responsibility yourself for saying, here are these records. And like everybody else, I have other things I'd like to get into, but I'm out of time.
Okay.
Senator King.
Thank you. First, I'd like to acknowledge Senator Blumenthal and earlier Senator Nelson. I think the one principal thing you'll learn today, Senator, is that the chairs there are less comfortable than the chairs here. But I welcome you to the hearing. Mr. Comey, a broad question. Was the Russian activity in the 2016 election a one-off proposition, or is this part of a long-term strategy? Will they be back?
Oh, it's a long-term practice of theirs. It stepped up a notch in a significant way in 16. They'll be back.
I think that's very important for the American people to understand that this is very much a forward-looking investigation in terms of how do we understand what they did and how do we prevent it. Would you agree that that's a big part of our role here?
Yes, sir, and it's not a Republican thing or a Democratic thing. It really is an American thing. They're going to come for whatever party they choose to try and work on behalf of, and they're not devoted to either in my experience. They're just about their own advantage, and they will be back.
That's my observation. I don't think Putin is a Republican or a Democrat. He's an opportunist.
I think that's a fair statement.
With regard to several of these conversations, in his interview with Lester Holt on NBC, the president said, I had dinner with him. He wanted to have dinner because he wanted to stay on. Is this an accurate statement?
No, sir.
Did you in any way initiate that dinner?
No. He called me at my desk at lunchtime and asked me, was I free for dinner that night? And called himself and said, can you come over for dinner tonight? And I said, yes, sir. He said, will 6 work? I think he said 6 first. And then he said, I was going to invite your whole family, but we'll do that next time. I wanted you to come over. And is that a good time? I said, sir, whatever works for you. And then he said, how about 6:30? And I said, whatever works for you, sir. And then I hung up and had to call my wife and break a date with her. I was supposed to take her out to dinner that night.
That's one of the all-time great excuses for breaking a date.
Yeah. In retrospect, I love spending time with my wife. I wish I'd been there that night.
That's one question I'm not going to follow up, Mr. Comey. But in that same interview, the president said, in one case I called him and in one case he called me. Is that an accurate statement?
No.
Did you ever call the president?
No. I might. The only reason I'm hesitating is I think there was at least one conversation where I was asked to call the White House switchboard to be connected to him, but I never initiated a communication with the president.
And in his press conference on May 18th, the president was asked whether he had urged you to shut down the investigation into Michael Flynn. The president responded, quote, no, no. Next question. Is that an accurate statement?
I don't believe it is.
Thank you. With regard to the question of him being personally under investigation, does that mean that the dossier is not being reviewed or investigated or followed up on in any way?
I obviously can't comment either way. I can't talk in an open setting about the investigation as it was when I was the head of the FBI, and obviously it's Director Bob Mueller's responsibility now, so I don't know.
So clearly your statements to the president back in these various times when you assured him he wasn't under investigation were as of that moment. That correct, is it
Correct.
not?
Correct.
Now, on the Flynn investigation, is it not true that Mr. Flynn was and is a central figure in this entire investigation of the relationship between the Trump campaign and the Russians?
I can't answer that in an open setting, sir.
Certainly, Mr. Flynn was part of the so-called Russian investigation. Can you answer that question?
I have to give you the same answer.
All right. We'll be having a closed session shortly, so we will follow up on that. In terms of his comments to you about, I think you were in response to Mr. Risch, Senator Risch, he said, I hope you will hold back on that. But when when a president of the United States in the Oval Office says something like I hope or I suggest or would you, do you take that as a directive?
Yes. Yes. It rings in my ear as kind of, will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest?
I was just going to quote that in 1170, December 29, Henry II said, who will rid me of this meddlesome priest? And then the next day he was killed. Thomas à Becket. That's exactly the same situation. We're thinking along the same lines. Several other questions, and these are a little bit more detailed. What do you know about the Russian bank VEB?
Nothing that I can talk about in an open setting.
Well,
I know
that takes care of my next three questions.
I know it exists. Yes, sir.
You know it exists. What is the relationship of the ambassador from Russia to the United States, to the Russian intelligence infrastructure?
Well, he's a diplomat who is the chief of mission at the Russian embassy, which employs a robust cohort of intelligence officers. And so surely he's witting of their very, very aggressive intelligence operations, at least some of it in the United States. I don't consider him to be an intelligence officer himself. He's a diplomat.
Did the FBI ever brief the Trump administration about the advisability of interacting directly with Ambassador Kislyak?
I think all I can say sitting here is there were a variety of defensive briefings given to the incoming administration about the counterintelligence risk.
Back to Mr. Flynn, would closing out the Flynn investigation have impeded the overall Russian investigation?
No. Well, unlikely, except to the extent there's always a possibility if you have a criminal case against someone and you bring it and squeeze them, you flip them, and they give you information about something else. But I saw the two as touching each other but separate. With regard to your memos, isn't it true that in a court case when you're weighing evidence, contemporaneous memos and contemporaneous statements to third parties are considered probative in terms of the validity of testimony? Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cotton. Senator Langford.
Well, Director Comey, good to see you again. You too. We've had multiple opportunities to be able to visit, as everyone on this dais has, and I appreciate you and your service and what you have done for the nation for a long time, what you continue to do. I've told you before, in the heat of last year, when we had opportunities to visit personally, that I pray for you and for your family because you do carry a tremendous amount of stress, and that is still true today. Thank you. Let me walk through a couple things with you. Your notes are obviously exceptionally important because they give a very rapid account of what you wrote down and what you perceived happened in those different meetings. Have you had the opportunity to be able to reference those notes when you were preparing the written statement that you put for us today? Yes. Yes. I think nearly all of my written recordings of my conversations, I had a chance to review them before filing my statement. Do you have a copy of any of those notes personally? I don't. I turned them over to Bob Mueller's investigators. The individual that you told about your memos that then was sent on to the New York Times, did they have a copy of those memos or were they told orally of those memos? Had a copy. I had a copy at the time. Do they still have a copy of those memos? It's a good question. I think so. I guess I can't say for sure sitting here, but I guess I don't know, but I think so. So the question is, could you ask them to hand that copy right back to you so you could hand them over to this committee? Potentially. I would like to move that from potential to see if we can ask that question so we can have a copy of those. Obviously, those notes are exceptionally important to us to be able to go through the process so we can continue to get to the facts as we see it. As you know, the written documents are exceptionally important. Yeah. Are there other documents that we need to be aware of that you used in your preparation for your written statement that we should also have that would assist us in helping with this?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Past the February the 14th meeting, which is a very important meeting, obviously, as we discuss the conversations here about Michael Flynn. When the president asked you about he hopes that you would let this go, and the conversation back and forth about being a good guy, after that time, did the president ever bring up anything about Michael Flynn again to you? You had multiple other conversations you have documented with the president.
No, I don't remember him ever bringing it up again.
Did any member of the White House staff ever come to you and talk to you about letting go of the Michael Flynn case or dropping it or anything referring to that?
No. Nope.
Did the Director of National Intelligence come to you and talk to you about that?
No.
Did anyone from the Attorney General's office, the Department of Justice, ask you about that?
No.
Did the head of NSA talk to you about that?
No.
The key aspect here is if this seems to be something the president's trying to get you to drop it, this seems like a pretty light touch to drop it, to bring it up at that moment, the day after he had just fired Flynn, to come back in and say, I hope we can let this go, but then it never reappears again. Did it slow down your investigation or any investigation that may or may not be occurring with Michael Flynn?
No, although I don't know there are any manifestations, outward manifestations of the investigation between February 14th and when I was fired. So I don't know that the president would have any way of knowing whether it was effective or not.
Okay, that's fair enough. If the president wanted to stop an investigation, how would he do that? Knowing it's an ongoing criminal investigation or counterintelligence investigation, would that be a matter of trying to go to you perceive, and to say you make it stop because he doesn't have the authority to stop? Or how would the president make an ongoing investigation stop?
Again, I'm not a legal scholar, so smarter people answer this better, but I think as a legal matter, the president is the head of the executive branch and could direct, in theory, we have important norms against this, but direct that anybody be investigated or anybody not be investigated. I think he has the legal authority because all of us ultimately report in the executive branch up to the president.
Okay. Would that be to you? Would that be to the Attorney General? Would that be to who that would do that?
Suppose you could do it to, if you want to issue a direct order, it could do it in any way. Could do it through the Attorney General or issue it directly to me.
Well, is there any question that the president is not real fond of this investigation? I can think of multiple 140-word character expressions that he's done publicly to express he's not fond of the investigations. I've heard you share before in this conversation that you're trying to keep the agents that are working on it away from any comment the president might have made. Quite frankly, the president has informed around 6 billion people that he's not real fond of this investigation. Do you think there's a difference in that?
Yes.
Okay.
I think there's a big difference in kicking superior officers out of the Oval Office, looking the FBI director in the eye and saying, I hope you'll let this go. I think if the agents, as good as they are, heard the President of the United States did that,
That's you.
There's a real risk of a chilling effect on their work. That's why we kept it so tight.
Okay. You had mentioned before about some news stories and news accounts. Without having to go into all the names and the specific times and to be able to dip into all that, have there been news accounts about the Russia investigation, about collusion, about this whole event, or accusations that as you read the story, you were stunned about how wrong they got the facts?
Yes, there have been many, many stories purportedly based on classified information about lots of stuff, but especially about Russia, that are just dead wrong.
I was interested in your comment that you made as well, that the president said to you, if there were some satellite associates of his that did something wrong, it would be good to find that out. That the president seemed to talk to you specifically on March the 30th and say, I'm frustrated that the word is not getting out that I'm not under investigation, but if there are people that are in my circle that are, let's finish the investigation. Is that how you took it as well?
Yes, sir. Yes.
And then you made a comment earlier about the Attorney General, previous Attorney General, asking you about the investigation on the Clinton emails, saying that you've been asked not to call it an investigation anymore, but to call it a matter. And you had said that confused you. Can you give us additional details on that?
Well, it concerned me because we were at the point where we had refused to confirm the existence, as we typically do, of an investigation for months. And it was getting to a place where that looked silly because the campaigns were talking about interacting with the FBI in the course of our work. The Clinton campaign at the time was using all kinds of euphemisms, security review, matters, things like that for what was going on. We were getting to a place where the Attorney General and I were both going to have to testify and talk publicly about it. And I wanted to know, was she going to authorize us to confirm we had an investigation? And she said, yes, but don't call it that, call it a matter. And I said, why would I do that? And she said, just call it a matter. And again, you look back in hindsight, you think, should I have resisted harder? I just said, all right, this isn't a hill worth dying on. And so I just said, okay, the press is going to completely ignore it. And that's what happened. When I said, we have opened a matter, they all reported the FBI has an investigation open. And so that concerned me because that language tracked the way the campaign was talking about the FBI's work, and that's concerning.
It gave the impression that the campaign was somehow using the same language as the FBI because you were handed the campaign language and told to be able to use the campaign language.
And again, I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but it gave the impression that the Attorney General was looking to align the way we talked about our work with the way a political campaign was describing the same activity, which was inaccurate. We had a criminal investigation open. As I've said before, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We had an investigation open at the time, and so that gave me a queasy feeling.
Thank you.
Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Comey. I appreciate very much you being here. West Virginians are very interested in this hearing that we're having today. I've had over 600 requests for questions to ask you from my fellow West Virginians, and most of them have been asked. And there's quite a few of them that were quite detailed while asking our classified hearing. I want to thank you, first of all, for coming and agreeing to be here, volunteering, but also volunteering to stay into the classified hearing. I don't know if you had a chance to watch our hearing yesterday.
I watched part of it, yes, sir.
And it was quite troubling. My colleagues here had some very pointed questions they wanted answers to. They weren't classified. They could have answered in this open setting. They refused to do so. So that even makes us much more appreciative of your cooperation. Sir, the seriousness of the Russian aggressions in our past elections, and knowing that it'll be ongoing, as Senator King had alluded to, what's your concerns there? I mean, what should the American public understand? People said, well, why are we worried about this? Why make such a big deal out of this Russian investigation? Can you tell me what your thoughts would be?
Sir.
And then the final thing is on this same topic. Did the president ever show any concern or interest or curiosity about what the Russians were doing?
Thank you, Senator. As I said earlier, I don't remember any conversations with the president about the Russia election interference.
Did he ever ask you any questions concerning this?
Well, there was an initial briefing of our findings, and I think there was conversation there. I don't remember it exactly, where he asked questions about what we had found and what our sources were and what our confidence level was. But after that, I don't remember anything. The reason this is such a big deal is we have this big, messy, wonderful country where we fight with each other all the time, but nobody tells us what to think, what to fight about, what to vote for, except other Americans. And that's wonderful and often painful. But we're talking about a foreign government that, using technical intrusion and lots of other methods, tried to shape the way we think, we vote, we act. That is a big deal. And people need to recognize it. It's not about Republicans or Democrats. They're coming after America, which I hope we all love equally. They want to undermine our credibility in the face of the world. They think that this great experiment of ours is a threat to them, and so they're going to try to run it down and dirty it up as much as possible. That's what this is about, and they will be back because we remain, as difficult as we can be with each other, we remain that shining city on the hill, and they don't like it.
So this is extremely important. It's extremely dangerous what we're dealing with, and it's needed, is what you're saying.
Yes, sir.
Do you believe there were any tapes or recordings of your conversations with the president?
It never occurred to me till the president's tweet. I'm not being facetious. I hope there are, and I'll consent to the release of.
So both of you are in the same findings here. You both hope there's tapes and recordings.
Well, all I can do is hope. The president surely knows whether he taped me, and if he did, my feelings aren't hurt. Release all the tapes. I'm good with it.
Gotcha. Sir, do you believe that Robert Mueller, our new special investigator on Russia, will be thorough and complete without political intervention? And would you be confident on these findings and recommendations?
Yes, Bob Mueller is one of the finest people and public servants this country has ever produced. He will do it well. He is a dogged, tough person, and you can have high confidence that when it's done, he's turned over all the rocks.
You've been asked a wide variety of questions today, and we're going to be hearing more, I'm sure, in our classified hearing. Something I often ask folks when they come here, what details of this saga would be, should we be focusing on, and what would you recommend us do differently? Or to adjust our perspective on this?
I don't know. One of the reasons that I'm pleased to be here is I think this committee has shown the American people, although we have two parties and we disagree about important things, we can work together when it involves the core interests of the country. So I would hope you'll just keep doing what you're doing. It's good in and of itself, but it's also a model, especially for kids, that we are a functioning adult democracy.
And you also mentioned you had, I think, six meetings, 3 times in person, 6 on the phone, 9 times in conversation with the president. Did he ever, at that time, allude that you were not performing adequately? Ever indicate that at all?
Oh, no. In fact, the contrary, quite often. Yeah, he called me one day. I was about to get on a helicopter. The head of the DEA was waiting in the helicopter for me, and he just called to check in and tell me I was doing an awesome job and wanted to see how I was doing. And I said, I'm doing fine, sir. And then I finished the call and got on the helicopter.
Mr. Comey, do you believe you would have been fired if Hillary Clinton had become president?
That's a great question. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
You have any thoughts about it?
No, I might have been. I don't know. Look, I've said before, that was an extraordinarily difficult and painful time. I think I did what I had to do. I knew it was going to be very bad for me personally, and the consequence of that might have been, if Hillary Clinton was elected, I might have been terminated. I don't know. I really don't.
My final question will be, after February 14th meeting in the Oval Office, you mentioned that you asked Attorney General Sessions to ensure that you were never left alone with the president. Did you ever consider why Attorney General Sessions was not asked to stay in the room?
Oh, sure. I did, and have. And in that moment, I knew.
You ever talked to him about it?
No.
You never had a discussion with Jeff Sessions on this?
No, not at all.
On any of your meetings?
No.
Did he inquire? Did he show any inquiry whatsoever? What was that meeting about?
No. Oh, you're right. I did say to him, I'd forgotten this, when I talked to him and said, you have to be between me and the president, and that's incredibly important, and I forget my exact words, I passed along the president's message about the importance of aggressively pursuing leaks of classified information, which is a goal I share, and I passed that along to the Attorney General. I think it was the next morning in a meeting, but I did not tell him about the Flynn part.
Do you believe this will rise to the obstruction of justice?
I don't know. That's Bob Mueller's job to sort that out.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cotton.
Mr. Comey, you encouraged the president to release the tapes. Will you encourage the Department of Justice or your friend at Columbia or Mr. Mueller to release your memos?
Sure.
You said that you did not record your conversations with President Obama or President Bush in memos. Did you do so with Attorney General Sessions or any other senior member of the Trump Department of Justice?
No.
Did you?
I'm sorry.
Did you record conversations and memos with Attorney General Lynch or any other senior member of the Obama Department of Justice?
No, not that I recall.
In your statement for the record, you cite 9 private conversations with the president, 3 meetings, and 2 phone calls. There are 4 phone calls that are not discussed in your statement for the record. What happened in those phone calls?
The president called me, I believe, shortly before he was inaugurated as a follow-up to our conversation, private conversation on January the 6th. He just wanted to reiterate his rejection of the allegation and talk about, he thought about it more and why he thought it wasn't true, the verified and unverified and salacious parts. And during that call, he asked me, again, hope you're going to stay, you're doing a great job. And I told him that I intended to. There was another phone call that I mentioned, I think was, could have the date wrong, March the 1st, where he called just to check in with me as I was about to get on the helicopter. There was a secure call we had about an operational matter that was not related to any of this, about something the FBI was working on. He wanted to make sure that I understood how important he thought it was. A totally appropriate call. And then the fourth call, I'm probably forgetting. I may have meant the call when he called to invite me to dinner. I'll think about it as I'm answering other questions, but I think I got that right.
Let's turn our attention to the underlying activity at issue here, Russia's hacking into those emails and releasing them, and the allegations of collusion. Do you believe Donald Trump colluded with Russia?
It's a question I don't think I should answer in an open setting. As I said, that we didn't. When I left, we did not have an investigation focused on President Trump. But that's a question that'll be answered by the investigation, I think.
Let me turn to a couple statements by one of my colleagues, Senator Feinstein. She was the ranking member on this committee until January, which means she had access to information that only she and Chairman Burr did. She's now the senior Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, meaning she has access to the FBI that most of us don't. On May 3rd, on CNN's Wolf Blitzer show, she was asked, do you have evidence that there was in fact collusion between Trump associates and Russia during the campaign? She answered, not at this time. On May 18th, at the same show, Mr. Blitzer said, the last time we spoke, Senator, I asked if you had actually seen any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, and you said to me, and I'm quoting you now, you said, not at this time. Has anything changed since we last spoke? Senator Feinstein said, well, no, it hasn't. Do you have any reason to doubt those statements?
I don't doubt that Senator Feinstein was saying what she understood. I just don't want to go down that path, first of all, because I'm not in the government anymore, and answering in the negative, I just worry leads me deeper and deeper into talking about the investigation in an open setting. I'm always trying to be fair. I don't want to be unfair to President Trump. I'm not trying to suggest by my answer something nefarious, but I don't want to get into the business of saying not as to this person, not as to that person.
On February 14th, the New York Times published a story, the headline of which was, Trump campaign aides had repeated contacts with Russian intelligence. You were asked earlier if that was an inaccurate story, and you said in the main. Would it be fair to characterize that story as almost entirely wrong?
Yes.
Did you have, at the time that story was published, any indication of any contact between Trump people and Russians, intelligence officers, other government officials, or close associates of the Russian government?
That's one I can't answer sitting here.
We can discuss that in a classified setting then. I want to turn attention now to Mr. Flynn and the allegations of his underlying conduct. To be specific, his alleged interactions with the Russian ambassador on the telephone, and then what he said to senior Trump administration officials and Department of Justice officials. I understand there are other issues with Mr. Flynn related to his receipt of foreign monies or disclosure of potential advocacy activity on behalf of foreign governments. Those are serious and credible allegations that I'm sure will be pursued, but I want to speak specifically about his interactions with the Russian ambassador. There was a story on January 23rd in the Washington Post that says, entitled, FBI reviewed Flynn's calls with Russian ambassador but found nothing illicit. Is this story accurate?
I don't want to comment on that, Senator, because I'm pretty sure the Bureau has not confirmed any interception of communications. And so I don't want to talk about that in an open setting.
Would it be improper for an incoming national security advisor to have a conversation with a foreign ambassador?
In my experience, no.
But you can't confirm or deny that the conversation happened, and we would need to know the contents of that conversation to know if it was in fact improper.
Yeah, I don't think I can talk about that in an open setting. And again, I've been out of government now a month, so I also don't want to talk about things when it's now somebody else's responsibility. But maybe in the classified setting, we can talk more about that.
You stated earlier that there was an open investigation of Mr. Flynn in the FBI. Did you or any FBI agent ever sense that Mr. Flynn attempted to deceive you or made false statements to an FBI agent?
I don't want to go too far. That was the subject of the criminal inquiry.
Did you ever come close to closing the investigation on Mr. Flynn?
I don't think I can talk about that in an open setting either.
We can discuss these more in the closed setting then. Mr. Comey, in 2004, you were a part of a well-publicized event about an intelligence program that had been recertified several times, and you were acting Attorney General when Attorney General John Ashcroft was incapacitated due to illness. There was a dramatic showdown at the hospital here. The next day, you said that you wrote a letter of resignation and signed it before you went to meet with President Bush to explain why you refused to certify it. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think so.
At any time in the 3.5 months you were the FBI director during the Trump administration, did you ever write and sign a letter of recommendation and leave it on your desk?
Letter of resignation? No, sir.
Letter of resignation.
No, sir.
So despite all of the things that you've testified to here today, you didn't feel this rose to the level of an honest but serious difference of legal opinion between accomplished and skilled lawyers in that 2004 episode?
I wouldn't characterize the circumstances in 2004 that way, but to answer, no, I didn't encounter any circumstance that led me to intend to resign, consider to resign. No, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Harris.
Director Comey, I want to thank you. You are now a private citizen, and you are enduring a Senate Intelligence Committee hearing, and each of us gets 7 minutes instead of 5, as yesterday, to ask you questions. So thank you.
No,
for
I'm
wanting to
between
speak truth.
opportunities
Well,
now, so.
Well, you are. I'm sure you'll have future opportunities. You know, you and I are both former prosecutors. I'm not going to require you to answer. I just want to make a statement that in my experience of prosecuting cases, when a robber held a gun to somebody's head and said, "I hope you will give me your wallet," the word hope was not the most operative word at that moment. But you don't have to respond to that point. I have a series of questions to ask you, and they're going to start with, are you aware of any meetings between the Trump administration officials and Russian officials during the campaign that have not been acknowledged by those officials in the White House?
That's not even if I remember clearly, that's not a question I can answer in an open setting.
Are you aware of any efforts by Trump campaign officials or associates of the campaign to hide their communications with Russian officials through encrypted communications or other means?
I have to give you the same answer, Senator.
Sure. In the course of the FBI's investigation, did you ever come across anything that suggested that communications records, documents, or other evidence had been destroyed?
I think I got to give you the same answer because it would touch on investigative matters.
And are you aware of any efforts or potential efforts to conceal communications between campaign officials and Russian officials?
I think I have to give you the same answer, Senator.
Thank you. As a former Attorney General, I have a series of questions about your connection with the Attorney General during the course of your tenure as Director. What is your understanding of the parameters of General Sessions' recusal from the Russia investigation?
I think it's described in a written release or statement from DOJ, which I don't remember sitting here, but the gist was he would be recused from all matters relating to Russia and the campaign or activities of Russia and the 2016 election, I think, something like that.
So is your knowledge of the extent of his recusal based on the public statements he's made?
Correct.
Okay. So was there any kind of memorandum issued from the Attorney General or the Department of Justice to the FBI outlining the parameters of his recusal?
Not that I'm aware of.
And do you know if he reviewed any FBI or DOJ documents pertaining to the investigation before he was recused?
I don't know.
And after he was recused? I'm assuming it's the same answer.
Same answer.
And aside from any notice or memorandum that was not sent or what mechanism or processes were in place to ensure that the Attorney General would not have any connection with the investigation, to your knowledge?
I don't know for sure. I know that he had consulted with career ethics officials that know how to run a recusal at DOJ, but I don't know what mechanism they set up.
And the Attorney General recused himself from the investigation, but do you believe it was appropriate for him to be involved in the firing of the chief investigator of that case, of that Russia interference?
That's something I can't answer sitting here. It's a reasonable question, but that would depend on a lot of things I don't know. Like, what did he know? What was he told? Did he realize that the president was doing it because of the Russia investigation? Things like that. I just don't know the answer.
You've mentioned in your written testimony in here that the president essentially asked you for a loyalty pledge. Are you aware of him making the same request of any other members of the cabinet?
I am not.
Do you know one way or another what he...
I don't know one way or another. I've never heard anything about it.
And you mentioned that you had the conversation where he hoped that you would let the Flynn matter go on February 14th or thereabouts. It's my understanding that Mr. Sessions was recused from any involvement in the investigation about a full 2 weeks later. To your knowledge, was the Attorney General, did he have access to information about the investigation in those interim 2 weeks?
In theory, sure, because he's the Attorney General. I don't know whether he had any contact with any materials related to that.
To your knowledge, was there any directive that he should not have any contact with any information about the Russia investigation between the February 14th date and the day he was ultimately recused or recused himself on March 2nd?
Not to my knowledge. I don't know one way or another.
And did you speak to the Attorney General about the Russia investigation before his recusal?
I don't think so, no.
Do you know if anyone in the department, in the FBI, forwarded any documents or information or memos of any sort to the attention of the Attorney General before his recusal?
I don't know of any or remember any sitting here. It's possible, but I don't remember any.
Do you know if the Attorney General was involved, in fact involved, in any aspect of the Russia investigation after his recusal on the 2nd of March?
I don't. I would assume not, but I don't. Well, let me say it this way. I don't know of any information that would lead me to believe he did something to touch the Russia investigation after the recusal.
In your written testimony, you indicate that after you were left alone with the President, you mentioned that it was inappropriate and should never happen again to the Attorney General. And apparently he did not reply, and you write that he did not reply. What did he do, if anything? Did he just look at you? Was there a pause for a moment? What happened?
I don't remember real clearly. I have a recollection of him just kind of looking at me, and there's a danger here I'm projecting onto him, so this may be a faulty memory, but I kind of got his body language gave me the sense like, what am I going to do?
Did he shrug?
I don't remember clearly. I think the reason I have that impression is I have some recollection of almost imperceptible, like, what am I going to do? But I don't have a clear recollection of that. He didn't say anything.
And on that same February 14th meeting, you said you understood the President to be requesting that you drop the investigation. After that meeting, however, you received 2 calls from the President, March 30th and April 11th, where the President talked about a cloud over his presidency. Has anything you've learned in the months since your February 14th meeting changed your understanding of the President's request? I guess it would be what he has said in public documents or public interviews?
Correct.
Okay. And is there anything about this investigation that you believe is in any way biased or is not being informed by a process of seeking the truth?
No. The appointment of a special counsel should offer great, especially given who that person is, great comfort to Americans, no matter what your political affiliation is, that this will be done independently, competently, and honestly.
And do you believe that he should have full authority, Mr. Mueller, to be able to pursue that investigation?
Yes, and knowing him well over the years, if there's something that he thinks he needs, he will speak up about it.
Do you believe he should have full independence?
Oh, yeah. And he wouldn't be part of it if he wasn't going to get full independence.
Thank you.
Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Comey, I'll repeat what I've said at previous hearings, that I believe you're a good and decent man who's been dealt a very difficult hand, starting back with the Clinton email investigation. And I appreciate your willingness to appear here today voluntarily and answer our questions and cooperate with our investigation. As a general matter, if an FBI agent has reason to believe that a crime has been committed, do they have a duty to report it?
That's a good question. I don't know that there's a legal duty to report it. They certainly have a cultural, ethical duty to report it.
You're unsure whether they would have a legal duty?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've not thought about it before. I don't know where the legal, there's a statute that prohibits misprision of a felony, knowing of a felony, and taking steps to conceal it, but this is a different question. And so look, let me be clear. I would expect any FBI agent who has information about a crime being committed to report it.
Me too.
But where you rest that obligation, I don't know. It exists.
And let me ask you as a general proposition, if
you're trying to make an investigation go away. Is firing an FBI director a good way to make that happen? By that, I mean...
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I'm obviously hopelessly biased, given that I was the one fired.
I understand it's personal.
No, given the nature of the FBI, I meant what I said. There's no indispensable people in the world, including at the FBI, that there's lots of bad things about me not being at the FBI. Most of them are for me, but the work's going to go on as before.
So nothing that's happened that you've testified to here today has impeded the investigation of the FBI or Director Mueller's commitment to get to the bottom of this from the standpoint of the FBI and the Department of Justice. Would you agree with that?
Correct. Especially the appointment of former Director Mueller is a critical part of that equation.
Let me take you back to the Clinton email investigation. I think you've been cast as a hero or a villain, depending on the whose political ox is being gored at many different times during the course of the Clinton email investigation, even now perhaps. But you clearly were troubled by the conduct of the sitting Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, when it came to the Clinton email investigation. You mentioned the characterization that you'd been asked to accept that this was a matter and not a criminal investigation, which you said it was. There was the matter of President Clinton's meeting on the tarmac with the sitting Attorney General at a time when his wife was subject to a criminal investigation, and you suggested that perhaps there are other matters that you may be able to share with us later on in a classified setting. But it seems to me that you clearly believe that Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, had an appearance of a conflict of interest on the Clinton email investigation. Is that correct?
I think that's fair. I didn't believe she could credibly decline that investigation, at least not without grievous damage to the Department of Justice and to the FBI.
And under Department of Justice and FBI norms, wouldn't it have been appropriate for the Attorney General, or if she had recused herself, which she did not do, for the Deputy Attorney General to appoint a special counsel? That's essentially what's happened now with Director Mueller. Would that have been an appropriate step in the Clinton email investigation, in your opinion?
Certainly a possible step, yes, sir.
And were you aware that Ms. Lynch had been requested numerous times to appoint a special counsel and had refused?
Yes, from, I think members of Congress had repeatedly asked, yes, sir.
Yours truly did on multiple occasions. And that heightened your concerns about the appearance of a conflict of interest with the Department of Justice, which caused you to make what you have described as an incredibly painful decision to basically take the matter up yourself, and led to that July press conference.
Yes, sir. After the former President Clinton, met on the plane with the Attorney General, I considered whether I should call for the appointment of a special counsel, and I decided that that would be an unfair thing to do because I knew there was no case there. We had investigated it very, very thoroughly. I know this is a subject of passionate disagreement, but I knew there was no case there, and calling for the appointment of special counsel would be brutally unfair because it would send the message, aha, there's something here. That was my judgment. Again, lots of people have different views of it, but that's how I thought about it.
Well, if the special counsel had been appointed, they could have made that determination that there was nothing there and declined to pursue it, right?
Sure, but it would have been many months later or a year later.
Let me just ask you to, given the experience of the Clinton email investigation and what happened there, do you think it's unreasonable for anyone, any president, who has been assured on multiple occasions that he's not the subject of an FBI investigation, do you think it's unreasonable for them to want the FBI director to publicly announce that so that this cloud over his administration would be removed?
I think that's a reasonable point of view. The concern would be obviously, because if that boomerang comes back, it's going to be a very big deal because there will be a duty to correct.
Well, we saw that in the Clinton email investigation, of course.
Yes, I recall that.
Yeah, I know you do. So let me ask you finally, in the minute that we have left, there was this conversation back and forth about loyalty, and I think we all appreciate the fact that an FBI director is a unique public official in the sense that he's a political appointee in one sense, but he has a duty of independence to pursue the law pursuant to the constitutional laws of the United States. And so when the president asked you about loyalty, you got in this back and forth about, well, I'll pledge you my honesty. And then it looks like, from what I've read, you agreed upon honest loyalty or something like that. Is that the characterization?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Comey. There have been press reports that the president, in addition to asking you to drop the Flynn investigation, has asked other senior intelligence officials to take steps which would tend to undermine the investigation into Russia. There's been reports that he's asked DNI Coates and Admiral Rogers to make public statements exonerating him or taking the pressure off him, and also reports about Admiral Rogers and Director Pompeo to intervene and reach out to the FBI and ask them. Are you aware of any of these, or do you have any information with respect to any of these allegations?
I don't. I'm aware of the public reporting, but I had no contact, no conversation with any of those leaders about that subject.
Thank you. You have testified that you interpret the discussion with the president about Flynn as a direction to stop the investigation. Is that correct?
Yes.
You've testified that the president asked you to lift the cloud by essentially making public statements exonerating him and perhaps others. You refused, correct?
I didn't do it. I didn't refuse the president. I told him we would see what we could do, and then the second time he called, I told him in substance, that's something your lawyer will have to take up with the Justice Department.
And part of the underlying logic was that, we've discussed many times throughout this morning, is the duty to correct. That is a theoretical issue, but also a very practical issue. Was there your feeling that the direction of the investigation could, in fact, include the president?
Well, in theory, I mean, as I explained, the concern of one of my senior leader colleagues was, if you're looking at potential coordination between the campaign and Russia, the person at the head of the campaign is the candidate. So logically, this person argued, the candidate's knowledge, understanding will logically become a part of your inquiry if it proceeds. And so I understood that argument. My view was that what I said to the president was accurate and fair to him. I resisted the idea of publicly saying it, although if the Justice Department had wanted to, that I would have done it, because of the duty to correct and the slippery slope problem.
And again, also, you've testified that the president asked you repeatedly to be loyal to him, and you responded you would be honestly loyal, which is, I think, your way of saying, I'll be honest and I'll be the head of the FBI and independent. Is that fair?
Correct. I tried honest first, and also, I mean, you see it in my testimony, I also tried to explain to him why it's in his interest, and every president's interest, for the FBI to be apart in a way, because its credibility is important to a president and to the country. And so I tried to hold the line. It got very awkward, and I then said, you'll always have honesty from me. He said honest loyalty, and then I acceded to that as a way to end this awkwardness.
At the culmination of all these events, you're summarily fired without any explanation or anything else.
Well, there was an explanation. I just don't buy it.
Well, yes. So you're fired. So do you believe that you were fired because you refused to take the president's direction? Is that the ultimate reason?
I don't know for sure. I know I was fired. Again, I take the president's words. I know I was fired because of something about the way I was conducting the Russia investigation was in some way putting pressure on him, in some way irritating him, and he decided to fire me because of that.
Now,
I can't go farther than that.
The Russian investigation, as you have pointed out, and as all my colleagues have reflected, is one of the most serious, hostile acts against this country and our history, undermining the very core of our democracy and our elections. It is not a discrete event. It will likely occur. It's probably being prepared now for 18 and 20 and beyond. And yet, the President of the United States fires you because, in your own words, some relation to this investigation. And then he shows up in the Oval Office with the Russian foreign minister, first after classifying you as crazy and a real nut job, which I think you've effectively disproved this morning. He said, I face pressure because of Russia. That's taken off. Your conclusion would be that the President, I would think, is downplaying the seriousness of this threat. In fact, took specific steps to stop a thorough investigation of the Russian influence, and also, from what you've said or what was been said this morning, doesn't seem to be particularly interested in these hostile threats by the Russians. Is that fair?
I don't know that I can agree to that level of detail. There's no doubt that it's a fair judgment. It's my judgment that I was fired because of the Russia investigation. I was fired in some way to change, or the endeavor was to change the way the Russia investigation was being conducted. That is a very big deal, and not just because it involves me. The nature of the FBI and the nature of its work requires that it not be the subject of political consideration. And then on top of that, you have the Russia investigation itself is vital because of the threat. And I know I should have said this earlier, but it's obvious. If any Americans were part of helping the Russians do that to us, that is a very big deal. And I'm confident that if that is the case, Director Mueller will find that evidence.
Finally, the President tweeted that James Comey better hope that there are no tapes of our conversation before he starts leaking to the press. Was that a rather unsubtle attempt to intimidate you from testifying and intimidate anyone else who seriously crosses his path of not doing it?
I'm not going to sit here and try and interpret the President's tweets. To me, its major impact was, as I said, occurred to me in the middle of the night. Holy cow, there might be tapes. And if there are tapes, it's not just my word against his on the direction to get rid of the Flynn investigation.
Thank you very much.
Senator McCain.
In the case of Hillary Clinton, you made the statement that there wasn't sufficient evidence to bring a suit against her, although it had been very careless in their behavior. But you did reach a conclusion in that case that it was not necessary to further pursue her. Yet at the same time, in the case of Mr. Comey, you said that there was not enough information to make a conclusion. Tell me the difference between your conclusion as far as former Secretary Clinton is concerned and Mr. Trump.
The Clinton investigation was a completed investigation that the FBI had been deeply involved in, and so I had an opportunity to understand all the facts and apply those facts against the law as I understood them. This investigation was underway, still going when I was fired, so it's nowhere near in the same place. At least it wasn't when I was.
But it's still ongoing.
Correct. So far as I know, it was when I left.
That investigation was going on. This investigation is going on. You reached separate conclusions.
No, that one was done.
That investigation of any involvement of Secretary Clinton or any of her associates is completed.
Yes, as of July the 5th, the FBI completed its investigative work, and that's what I was announcing, what we had done and what we had found.
Well, at least in the minds of this member, there's a whole lot of questions remaining about what went on, particularly considering the fact that, as you mentioned, it's a, quote, big deal as to what went on during the campaign. So I'm glad you concluded that part of the investigation, but I I think that the American people have a whole lot of questions out there, particularly since you just emphasized the role that Russia played. And obviously, she was a candidate for president at the time, so she was clearly involved in this whole situation where fake news, as you just described it, big deal, took place. You're going to have to help me out here. In other words, we're complete the investigation of anything that former Secretary Clinton had to do with the campaign is over, and we don't have to worry about it anymore?
With respect to Secretary, I'm a little confused, Senator. With respect to Secretary Clinton,
Yeah.
we investigated criminal investigation in connection with her use of a personal email server.
I understand.
And that's the investigation I announced the conclusion of on July 5th.
So, but at the same time, you made the announcement there would be no charges brought against then Secretary Clinton for any activities involved in the Russia involvement in our engagement in our election. I don't quite understand how you could be done with that, but not done with the whole investigation of their attempt to affect the outcome of our election.
No, I'm sorry. We're not, at least when I left, when I was fired on May the 9th, there was still an open, active investigation to understand the Russian efforts and whether any Americans work with them.
But you reached the conclusion that there was no reason to bring charges against Secretary Clinton. So you reached a conclusion. In the case of Mr. Comey, the President Comey, excuse me, in the case of President Trump, you have an ongoing investigation. So you got one candidate who you're done with and another candidate that you have a long way to go. Is that correct?
I don't know how far the FBI has to go, but yes, that the Clinton email investigation was completed, the investigation of Russia's efforts in connection with the election, and whether there was any coordination, and if so, with whom, between Russia and the campaign, was ongoing when I left.
You just made it clear in what you said. This is a, quote, big deal, unquote. I think it's hard to reconcile. In one case, you reach a complete conclusion, and the other side, you have not. And you, in fact, obviously, there's a lot more there, as we know, as you called it, a, quote, big deal. She's one of the candidates. But in her case, you say there would be no charges, and in the case of President Trump, the investigation continues. What has been brought out in this hearing is more and more emphasis on the Russian engagement and involvement in this campaign. How serious do you think this was?
Very serious, but I want to say something, be clear. We have not announced, and there was no predication to announce, an investigation of whether the Russians may have coordinated with Secretary Clinton's campaign. Secretary Clinton's campaign.
No, but they may not have been involved with their campaign. They were involved with the entire presidential campaign, obviously.
Of course. Yes, sir. And that is an investigation that began last summer, and so far as I'm aware, continues.
So both President Trump and former candidate Clinton are both involved in the investigation, yet one of them, you said there's going to be no charges, and the other one, the investigation continues. Well, I think there's a double standard there, to tell you the truth. Then when the president said to you, you talked about the April 11th phone call, and he said, quote, because I've been very loyal to you, very loyal. We had that thing, you know. Did that arouse your curiosity as what, quote, that thing was?
Yes.
Why didn't you ask him?
It didn't seem to me to be important for the conversation we were having to understand it. I took it to be an effort to communicate to me that there is a relationship between us where I've been good to you, you should be good to me.
Yeah, but I think it would intensely arouse my curiosity if the President of the United States said, we had that thing, you know. I'd like to know what the hell that thing is, particularly if I'm the director of the FBI.
Yeah, I get that, Senator. Honestly, I'll tell you what, this is speculation, but what I concluded at the time is in his memory he was searching back to our encounter at the dinner and was preparing himself to say, I offered loyalty to you, you promised loyalty to me, and all of a sudden his memory showed him that did not happen, and I think he pulled up short. That's just a guess, but I've a lot of conversations with humans over the
I
years.
think I would have had some curiosity if it had been about me, to be honest with you. So are you aware anything that would believe you to believe that the president or the members of the administration or members of the campaign could potentially be used to coerce or blackmail the administration?
That's a subject for investigations, not something I can comment on sitting here.
But you reached that conclusion as far as Secretary Clinton was concerned. But you're not reaching a conclusion as far as this administration is concerned. Are you aware of anything that would lead you to believe that information exists that could coerce members of the administration or blackmail the administration?
That's not a question I can answer, Senator.
Senator's time's expired.
Thank you.
All time's expired for the hearing. Can I say for members, we'll reconvene promptly at 1 p.m. In the hearing room. We have a vote scheduled for 1:45. I would suggest that all members promptly be there at 1 o'clock. We have about 3 minutes. I'd like to have order. Photographers return to where you were, please. This hearing's not adjourned yet. Either that or we'll remove you. To members, we have about 3 minutes of updates that we would love to cover as soon as we get into the closed session before we have an opportunity to spend some time with Director Comey. Based on our agreement, it would be my intentions to adjourn that closed hearing between 2 and 2:10 so that members can go vote, and I would urge you to eat at that time. Jim, several of us on this committee have had the opportunity to work with you since you walked in the door. I want to say personally on behalf of all the committee members, we're grateful to you for your service to your country, not just in the capacity as FBI director, but as prosecutor, and more importantly, being somebody that loves this country enough to tell it like it is. I want to say to your workforce that we're grateful to them with the level of cooperation that they have shown us, with the trust we've built between both organizations, the Congress and the Bureau. We couldn't do our job if it wasn't for their willingness to share candidly with us the work that we need to see. This hearing's the 9th public hearing this committee has had this year. That is twice the historical year-long average of this committee. I think the Vice Chairman and my biggest challenge when this investigation has concluded is to return our hearings to the secrecy of a closed hearing, to encourage our members not to freely talk about intelligence matters publicly, and to respect the fact that we have a huge job, and that's to represent the entire body of the United States Senate and the American people, to make sure that we work with the intelligence community to provide you the tools to keep America safe, and that you do it within the legal limit or those limits that are set by the executive branch. We could not do it if it wasn't for a trusted partnership that you have been able to lead and others before you. So as we depart from this is a pivotal hearing in our investigation. We're grateful to you for the professionalism you've shown and your willingness. I will turn to the Vice Chairman.
I simply want to echo, again, the thanks for your appearance. And there clearly still remain a number of questions. And the one thing I want to commit to you, and more importantly, I think, Chairman, I want to commit to all those who are still potentially watching and following. There's still a lot of unanswered questions, and we're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to get the facts out. The American people deserve to know. There's the questions around implications of Trump officials and the Russians, but there's also the macro issue of what the Russians did and continue to do. And I think it is very important that all Americans realize that threat is real. It is continuous. It is not just towards our nation. It is all towards all Western democracies, and we have to come to a solution set. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Director Comey, thank you once again on behalf of the committee. This hearing's adjourned.